Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm so happy you are here with us today. We are here to talk with the author who has taken over our Bookish Road Trip Facebook page this week, our author Take the Wheel interview. And I have to say, these have been some of the most incredible, thought provoking posts that we've had. And so, without further ado, I would like to introduce to everyone our author, Henriette Lazaridis. Hello, Henriette.
Hi, Hope. Thank you for having me. And hello, everybody who's watching. It's been so fun to have these conversations on the Facebook posts with people about what would you do in these tricky situations.
Well, it has been a great week already. And before we go any further, and before we talk about not only your journey as a writer and a published author, but this incredible book, Terra Nova, I just fell in love with this book, and I told you earlier I read it in one day. I could not put it down.
Amazing. That makes me so happy. I always wanted to write something short, and Terra Nova is it because I'm very happy that people can just read it in one go. Yeah.
Okay. Well, here we go. I'm going to give everyone a little bit of your background and your very impressive resume, I must say. Henriette is the author of The Clover House, which was a Boston Globe bestseller, and Terra Nova from Pegasus Books. Her short work has appeared in Elle, the New York Times, and more. She has earned a Massachusetts Cultural Council Artist Grant, and she is a graduate of Middlebury College, Oxford University, where she was a Rhodes Scholar, and the University of Pennsylvania. Having taught English at Harvard, she now teaches at Grub Street in Boston. She founded the Drum Literary Magazine. So if anyone has comments or they have a question, please feel free to put them on our thread. And just remember, sometimes we can't always see who we're talking to. So if you could include your names, that would be incredible. I see that we're already getting some comments in. So that's very exciting. We have one that says, "Hi, Henriette, and afternoon, ladies." So, and we have Grace Salmon who has joined us, excited for this show. So, Henriette, could you give us a synopsis of Terra Nova for those who haven't had a chance to read this book?
Yeah, sure. It's the story of two fictional explorers in 1910 who are racing against some fictional Norwegians to be first to Antarctica. And the woman who is the wife of one and the lover of the other, who is back in London, Viola, and she is involved with the suffrage movement. She is a photographer like her lover, James Watts. And so she's doing photography related to and of the suffrage movement. And so it's about a love triangle, artistic rivalry, ambition, ethics, all those kinds of things.
So it is set in two different locations. It is set in London and it is set in Antarctica.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a very different settings. Tell me, how much research did you have to go through to research? Because Antarctica in 1910 and London 1910.
Yeah. So because I've been obsessed with Robert Scott since I was about 7 years old, and I saw a documentary about his race with an actual Norwegian, Roald Amundsen, to the pole. I've kind of my whole life been picking up little bits and pieces of information about Antarctica. And whenever there was something in the news, I would read it. And when I was growing up, there wasn't that much in the news about Antarctica. People didn't go there as far as I knew. But I was a little magpie. I was always collecting this information. And so when it came time to finally write this book that I'd been thinking about for almost my whole life, I stopped doing research on Antarctica. I made a pact. Don't look at any of your material that you have by Robert Scott. Don't look at Apsley Cherry Garrard's book about Scott's expeditions called The Worst Journey in the World, because I didn't want my language to be influenced by Scott's own language. So what I would do, though, is that I would write the stuff and then I would check, hold on a second. How do you make hoosh? Oh, yeah, it's dried pemmican. Oh. Boiled with oatmeal. Or I would look up after I was done with the writing for that day. I would just confirm a detail, like, did they have Primus stoves, and what kind of fuel do you burn for a Primus stove? But the Antarctic research was just my experiences with frostbite and cold, plus my vague recollections of what I'd read about Antarctica all my life, and then turned up several notches, thinking like, okay, if my eyelids click together when I'm super cold outside, then what's it like if you're in Antarctica? Your eyelids are probably freezing together. So that, and the London portion, I lived in London for one of the 4 years that I lived in the UK. I lived in North London. And so I knew at least where to go to confirm certain things, like what would your tube journey be from Chelsea to Whitechapel, and things like that. So, but the suffrage movement, I knew that it was obviously going on in 1910, but I didn't really know much at all about it besides the names of Emmeline and Christabel Pankhurst. So I did read quite a bit. I found some archival, primary sources about hunger strikers. Lady Constance Lytton wrote a diary of her time in prison, in Holloway Prison, and a few, critical works and stuff to just make sure that I had all of that correct.
Yeah. Well, I found that part fascinating, and I wanted to go back to that in a little while because I enjoyed Viola's journey, because it's, the book is separated. You have the men in Antarctica, and then you have Viola back in London. But let's talk about that journey to the South Pole. I think I told you this earlier. Not only did I felt like I was freezing as I was reading it, and it is a miserable journey, but I was starving, and I was just fascinated by all of those details. I mean, so you just kind of, as you just said, you just kind of created that on your own imagination and a little bit of research.
Yeah. I mean, like I knew that they ate this thing called hoosh, but I didn't actually know at first what was in hoosh. And I knew that they ate pemmican, but I didn't know what that was. So I had to make sure I understood that, yes, hoosh is that gruel that we talked about earlier, and pemmican is a kind of glorified beef jerky. But so, yeah, I was just sort of, one of the things that I wanted to do with the novel was, and this is one of the things that makes it not very long, is that this is not the kind of historical novel where when some item of like a tool, like an ice axe, how do I point? There, my ice axe there.
Yeah.
When an ice axe is introduced, you're not going to get a paragraph on how ice axes were made and what they were like back in 1910. I was kind of deliberately keeping the details streamlined. So there's a lot I don't talk about. And that's by design. But in terms of the fact that they have to use fuel to boil this, make water from the snow around, and they have little tiny bits of tea that's dwindling, and the hoosh is dwindling, and they're starving. Like, that was the essence that I wanted to reproduce. This feeling of like, we just don't have enough food, and they were only starting to understand. They knew what scurvy was. And they knew that you had to eat not just limes and lemons. That was the myth. Protein, animal protein as well. So they knew that, but that didn't mean that they didn't all like their teeth get loose, which is a disgusting detail that I had to learn about scurvy. So I tried to think about cold and hunger and bring those details.
So you have these two men, and they're both very ambitious. I would say, obviously, Heywood is probably the more ambitious one. This is his journey, and Watts is there to photograph it. So, yeah. But they both are very ambitious characters, and I found that fascinating.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to, in a way, I'm playing with different kinds of ambition, because you're right. Edwards he's the expedition leader. He's a very confident man. There's nuances, I hope, to him that kind of emerge later. Some vulnerabilities that I think emerge, but he's more explicitly ambitious, as I think you have to be if you're going to be an expedition leader. And Watts, he's like a Keatsian ambitious guy. He's a poetically ambitious guy. So he doesn't even necessarily feel comfortable with his own ambition, but he is very much in a kind of competition with Viola, who is his lover, and a photographer and an artist that he kind of has a a productive competition with, until it becomes something a little different when his ambition kind of goes in a different direction that we can't talk about. But this interested me because it seems like so many stories that we read and tell can come down to this question of there's ambition and there's love. I mean, writ large, right? Like, how do you reconcile those two? Because I mean, throughout everyone's experience, we make choices where we have to think about, well, I could do this for the person that I love, or I can follow my ambition. I mean, that happens so much, whether it's a child or a partner or a parent, or it's always, that's the question. It's like, and how comfortable are we with our ambition? Do we own it, or do we feel ashamed of it? And so with Watts and Heywood, I really wanted their relationship to kind of raise those questions. And then with Viola, who is the third person in this triangle, I wanted her ambition to be, you know, another factor there, where she is like Watts, an artist, but maybe has a bit more of that explicit ambition that her husband, Edward Heywood, has. And that might be what draws her to him, even though she loves James too.
Yeah, and so the other thing is fascinating about the men, before we go into London with Viola, they depend on each other, because when you are, you know, in the middle of nowhere, I mean, I can't think of a more middle of nowhere scenario than this. They have to depend on each other in order to survive. This isn't it, at some point it doesn't even become as they're trying to reach this place, they're trying to survive.
Yeah, and I, from the very beginning that I thought of the novel, I knew that I was going to have these two figures at the end. So, and we meet them after they, well, right after they, what am I trying to say? We meet them right before they shed the other two people in that last group that's going to the pole. And I wanted those two very much to be like, kind of in my mind was Victor Frankenstein and his monster. Because Victor Frankenstein, he creates the monster, but in a lot of ways, the monster creates Victor Frankenstein as well. And in that novel, if you've read it, if you know, for those who've read it and might recall it, it starts with a frame narrative where another character is writing a letter home to his sister. He's going to the North Pole. He's an adventurer to the North Pole, and it's on the snow and ice that Victor and the monster kind of appear, because they're chasing each other in the North Pole. So I wanted that sense of two people utterly dependent on each other for their own existence against a backdrop of ice. And so Frankenstein and that dependency was very much on my mind as I was creating these characters.
Well, and before we go any further, can you hold up this book cover? So before we go back to London, where Viola, because this book cover is absolutely stunning. It catches your eye. And
yeah,
real quick, how much input did you have as a writer? I know sometimes we don't get completely everything we want. How much were you able to have a say in it?
Yeah, I think it's wonderful. My editor, she did this for Terra Nova and for Last Days in Plaka, which is coming out next spring, sort of said, give us like almost like a Pinterest board of images that you are thinking of. And so I forget, I must have said, like, I don't want a woman's body part. I want something text-based. And I might have sent some pictures from Antarctic photographers like Scott's photographer and things like that. And they came back. It's Face Out Studio is the name of the design studio that's done this cover. And they came back with this image. The only thing that we tweaked, they had, I think it was, originally there were 2 skiers, and they were, and we talked about that with my editor, and I was saying, like, if there's 2, that's going to feel as though it refers to something in the story. Mm-hmm. So we decided, okay, how about 1? Let's see what Face Out Studio can do if it's just 1 skier. Anyway, long story short, they hit it right out of the park on the first try. I think this is great. And there's a beautiful, look at the back.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that cool?
Yes.
It's just so gorgeous.
It is a beautiful.
I really love it.
On the inside and on the out. We have a Facebook user who says, this is fascinating. I agree. It is. You have to read this. And also beautiful cover. Again, couldn't agree more. So let's change gears. Let's go to London. Let's talk about Viola. tell me, how did she come about? Where did she come from?
I knew at the beginning that I was going to have these two men, and I thought, okay, two isn't enough. It's too stable. It's too binary. Even though I wanted that sort of mutual creation thing and mutual destruction. But I wanted a third element to make it really unstable. And so I thought, okay, yeah, a woman who's in love with both of them. And someone asked me the other day, I said, like, well, why does she have to be in love with both of them? And I said, you know what? I don't really know. But I think I wanted to sort of explore for her. I wanted her to be a person who isn't doing the predictable thing of like a sequential, I love this one and now this one. And it's like, what happens if you try to hold both at once? That's going to be much more fraught. So I put her in that position, and I gave her the name Viola because I love Twelfth Night. And I wanted my female photographer to be like one of Shakespeare's trousers roles, where it's like you've got Rosamund from As You Like It, Portia in The Merchant of Venice, and Viola in Twelfth Night, characters who inhabit men's clothing at some point to achieve something that they can't achieve unless they're wearing the men's clothing, to put it in a sort of general way. And that fits for me, for Viola. She's someone who is occupying a very female space because she's involved with the hunger strikers, but she's also trying to claim what is traditionally a male space for her and for the other women too. So that's how she came to be. And I knew that she was going to be an artist. I knew she was going to go to the Slade School of Art, where she meets and meets Watts, and eventually, they form a relationship. And then it took 3 rewrites for me to get her right, to get this, like, her art project wasn't right the first time I wrote her section of the novel. It was like tacked on. It wasn't organic to the rest of the story. And then the second time I got a little closer, but it wasn't quite right. And then finally the third time through, I mean, there are entire chapters that are in the trash that will never see the light of day, where she has a completely different experience.
Well, her project, which I don't want to tell anyone, I don't want to give it away, that was one of my favorite parts of the book. So, and also it also showed, and I love about the men we talk about are ambitious, but Viola is also ambitious, which is kind of interesting, especially for the time period. I mean, women now, we can be ambitious, but in that time period, maybe not so much in 1910 London.
Yeah, I think that, again, I had to sort of streamline the story. So there's a lot of, there would have been a handful of other woman climbers, for instance. There were women who climbed. And in the novel, you learn that Viola climbs and hikes with Watson Haywood. And she wouldn't have been alone in that, but it certainly wasn't common. And the same thing with that kind of the photography that she's doing. She's not the only one. And she mentions Julia Margaret Cameron, who's a famous portrait photographer. So she's not alone, but she's certainly in the minority of being ambitious as an artist in that particular way. I mean, photography at that point, I think, was still a little bit emerging from that debate of, is it an art or is it a science? Is it a mechanical thing or a craft? Not because that could be mechanical. Is it a mechanical thing or an artistic thing? And so she's sort of saying, like, no, I've got these machines and I'm taking them out and I'm making art with them.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your writing of this book. How long did it take you to not edit, just to write your first draft?
I know with great specificity, from like December 5th to March, the end of March, for the men. And I would write it at 5 a.m. for like a couple hours, 2.5 hours in the morning, in the dark of winter, under the dimmest light I could stand, longhand with a fountain pen in my notebook. And then I got to the end of March and I was done with the men. And then I had to write tons of notes and do lots of, like, I talked to myself on paper. So I would have like 20, 30, 40 pages of just me talking, figuring it out, and looking up what's going on with the suffrage movement. Where am I going to put Viola? And then I think the Viola part probably took me another year. Maybe less than. I'm trying to remember now. Academic year, like from the fall to that following spring, and then the revision. There's a whole other piece that took almost another year of shaping and reshaping and rewriting and cutting and all
Yeah.
that.
Edits, when I edited my own book, I felt that was harder than actually just writing the book, was the editing part.
I find revision, I think it's the hardest thing I do. There was like one day recently I was revising another thing that I'm working on, and my husband walked in the door and I was like, I can't. I've been like holding all the balls in the air. I was exhausted. Whereas if I'm writing, it's a different thing. It goes at a different pace. And I'm actually trying over the last couple of years to make myself go slow. I know we place a lot of emphasis on, how many words did you do? Is it NaNoWriMo? And you're trying to get 50,000 in a month. And that works for a lot of people. But I think for me, I had gotten to a point where I thought, hold on a second, you're going too fast. You need to make sure that what you finish is truly finished, or as finished as it can be before an editor starts to help you see it better. And so with that in mind, I'm trying to just go slow. Like almost, I think when I did NaNoWriMo this fall, I said I wanted to write 200 words a day. Which is like, we're missing a decimal point there, right? Most people would be like 2,000 and yay.
I think you're right. It works for some people. I tried it as well, and it didn't work for me at that time, but I was also editing. So I think I think it's hard to have your brain doing the editing side and then trying to create a whole other story. So maybe I'll have a better luck coming, in November this year. But and Grace Salmon did say, so sad, trashing a chapter. I agree. I never get rid of anything. I put it in part of my computer just in case I can bring it back for a rainy day.
Absolutely. Yeah. So trash is a figurative term. They're in documents somewhere. And actually all the stuff that I wrote longhand, I know exactly behind that curtain where my printer is, there's a shelf that has all the notebooks that I wrote stuff on, and it's there. I can resurrect it if I want to.
I'm impressed that you write with a notebook. I haven't been able to do that. I'm more of it using my computer. So maybe
I've been doing that. I mean, I went through grad school with like a borrowed computer. So, I came into this writing thing as a longhand person, not by choice. But then I, went to the laptop. But with Terra Nova, when I started, I wanted to change everything about my routine. There was something I'd been thinking about, this novel about Antarctica, and I'd been thinking about it so long that I was almost getting scared to start it. And then I had a moment where I was like, oh, snap out of it, start right now, or else you'll never start. It was starting to loom kind of too large. And so one of the ways that I kind of got myself over any potential, I won't say writer's block because I don't think it exists, but whatever we want to call that, was to change everything about my routine. So, I'm a rower, and we normally get up at 5 a.m. to go out on the water, but it was December and we don't row because we could die because hypothermia. And so I told myself, if you can get up at 5 to row, you can get up at 5 to write. And so I changed that, the time of day, the method. I said longhand, it's going to be longhand. The whole approach, that was my, and since Terra Nova, I've not changed it at all. I continue to write longhand, and I've got them all here. This is a fresh one, a fresh empty Moleskine ready to go.
Well, let's talk about your next project. What is on the horizon for you?
Yeah, so it was just announced officially in Publishers Lunch today. So I've been talking about it for months, but I can finally say my next novel is back in Greece. It's called Last Days in Plaka, and it comes out in April of this coming year, again with Pegasus. And I'm revising now, so I have printed the manuscript. It's another short one, and I'm marking it up, preparatory to digging in with the computer.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
And I wanted to talk a little bit about that, about your life in Greece and how that has shaped you as a writer.
I think because I grew up bilingual, I mean, Greek was my first language. And then, as soon as I went outside to play with the children in the neighborhood, I was speaking English. And my mother grew up bilingual with French and Greek. So there was French in our household as well. So I've always been really interested in language. And there's like a weird code switching because when I'm in Greece, I don't speak any English, except, I mean, now with friends and family, but I usually like we're done. I'm speaking only Greek and I don't have an accent. And the same is true in English. I don't have an accent in my English. So, but I'm very attentive to how words are made and where they come from. And because Greek is the source of so much etymology in English, I'm always enjoying like taking the pieces of a word apart. And so I think as a writer, it makes me very careful about, not that all writers aren't, but in my weird way, I'm careful about the sound, the cadence. The older meanings of a word matter to me a lot. So I'm always trying to play it's like a little inside joke that I have only with myself about like some weird vestigial meaning of a word that I'm like, yay, that's in there. And I grew up we all grow up, I think, with stories. We're told stories as children, but my father it's true. He would sit on the side of my bed and he would tell me stories from the Odyssey for my bedtime stories. And I think the different thing is that when you're Greek, you're given the impression that you own all the stories because Homer is like related to me. Mm-hmm. And the gods are also related to me. At least this was how my mother behaved about the Greek gods. It was like, well, she's the cousin of so-and-so and he's the mother of that one. And so it kind of informs the storytelling and the desire to tell stories. At least for me, that's how that happened.
Well, that's fascinating. And real quick, just because we only have a few more minutes left, and do you have any, advice that you could give? Because we have a lot of aspiring writers, or we have published authors in our midst here, and we have wonderful readers as well. Is there any advice you could give to someone who is writing a book or thinking about writing a book?
I think the main thing is if you're how to say any story that you're writing is basically like you're taking something and you're holding it up and saying, what's that about? Like there's got to be some sort of like, what is that? A curiosity, something that you as the writer want to explore. And you have to figure out what that is. It's not always obvious. You might start writing a story and not know what is the question I'm trying to ask. And I would say, like, for once you're getting going, the thing that has just burned me so many times if I don't prepare is you've got to know what the character wants.
Yeah.
If you know that, you can start, because it doesn't even matter where you start. If they have a thing that they want that they don't have, that's a story. That's a story.
And do you have any other stories that are on the horizon? I know we have the one that's coming out in April, which congratulations, but are you plotting out another one in the near future?
I am finishing up another book that doesn't have any kind of home or anything yet, that is set in the world of physics and the Manhattan Project, and also a sort of cold case crime. So it kind of combines those elements around the second law of thermodynamics. Surely the sexiest thing you've ever wanted to write a novel about. And I teach a writing workshop in Greece, which I'm getting ready to do in about 10 days. So if people are interested in that kind of thing, look me up on my website and you'll see information about the writing workshop that I teach every summer.
Well, and I know everyone is going to want to stay connected with you. Can you tell them where they can find you on social media, your website address?
Yep. So it's my name, HenrietteLazaridis.com. I also have a Substack called The Entropy Hotel, which is, I think, my name.substack.com. And I'm on Instagram. Don't bother. I'm on Twitter, but I don't ever go there. And the author page on Facebook, but Writer Henriette is my Instagram handle. And I'm pretty good about posting stuff there.
Well, I can't thank you enough for being our author. And we still have you for another day. I can't wait to see what you're going to come up with tomorrow. And we are so grateful to have you here. And I know that everyone is having a fantastic week with you. I just want to remind everyone that next month I will be back here, but we're going to do it on Wednesday instead of our normal Thursday. It's going to be August the 9th at 1 p.m. Central. And I'm going to be interviewing Annie Catherine and her book, The Friendship Breakup. So we're going to I think they call it a mom-com or a mom-rom. So it's a new genre, and I'm already in it, and just I can't read it fast enough. But again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Hope. Thank you, everyone, so much for having me. It's been really, really fun.
Okay, until next time, everyone.
Okay.